There was a shift happening in sports that almost no one had truly grasped. On the surface, everything looked normal. Games played, points scored, highlights uploaded, and fans cheering like nothing had changed. But beneath all of that noise, something far more dangerous was unfolding. Something that investigators would later describe as a quiet epidemic threading its way across multiple leagues, campuses, and locker rooms. And once the first pieces of the puzzle fell into place, it became clear that what everyone assumed were isolated scandals were actually signs of a much bigger, much darker pattern. For fans, a bad game was just a bad game. A missed shot was just a miss. A strange substitution was just a coaching decision. But to investigators, each one of those moments could have been part of something orchestrated, not by coaches, not by referees, but by players themselves, players who were beginning to realize they had the power to manipulate the very sport that millions trusted. And that realization, if left unchecked, had the power to destabilize far more than the box score. The first shockwave happened when news broke that Chauncey Billups, Terry Rozier, and Damon Jones had all been arrested for illegal gambling activities. The initial reaction was disbelief. These were recognizable names, established professionals, players who had careers, reputations, and long histories in the NBA. And yet investigators revealed something surreal. These athletes weren't just betting illegally. They were manipulating outcomes, rigging prop bets, and coordinating with outside bettors who ended up making thousands of dollars in payouts based on the players' actions. It sounded like a rare mistake, a one-off, something that needed to be addressed, but didn't indicate a broader crisis. Then the NCAA made its move. 6 college players, spread out across 3 different programs, were permanently banned, not suspended for a season, not placed on probation, banned forever from college athletics. And the details investigators uncovered made the professional scandals look small by comparison. At Arizona State, a well-known player named B.J. Freeman was at the center of a scheme that operated in plain sight. Freeman wasn't a role player buried on the bench. He was the team's second leading scorer, the kind of player who dictated offensive flow, controlled tempo, and had the ball in his hands often enough to influence the outcome of countless bets. Investigators found messages across 4 separate games. Not vague hints, not coded language. Direct instructions sent to a former teammate and to his girlfriend, both of whom were placing bets on his performances. The messages were blunt. Take the over on my points. Bet the over on threes. I'm going for my assist tonight. And that's exactly what he tried to do. Even when the decisions hurt his team, even when the shots were forced, even when the passes were out of rhythm. The intent wasn't to win the game. It was to hit the numbers. When questioned, Freeman denied everything. He denied having a DraftKings account, denied coordinating bets, denied manipulating his play. But investigators already had the account information. They already had the emails. They already had the timestamps. The gambling profile was under his name, tied directly to his own address. Arizona State dismissed him from the team in February, unaware at the time that gambling was even involved. He attempted to transfer to UCF, assuming the crisis had blown over. But when the NCAA issued its ruling permanent ban, it became clear that a career had been destroyed by something he thought he could keep hidden. But even that wasn't the most shocking discovery. At the University of New Orleans, the situation felt like something pulled straight from a crime drama. 3 players, Quavius Hunter, Daishin Short, and Jamin Vincent, were not quietly discussing a risky decision behind closed doors. They were openly planning their betting strategy before a game, loud enough for another teammate to overhear, bold enough to assume they'd get away with it. The most disturbing revelation came during a timeout, with coaches nearby, with cameras rolling, with thousands watching from home. One of the players turned to a teammate and said, "Don't score any more points. Let the bets hit." The audacity stunned investigators. This wasn't sloppy. It was reckless. And the deeper they dug, the clearer it became that the players were communicating exactly how they intended to manipulate outcomes. In text messages that would later become public, Vincent was found openly telling people that they were planning to throw the game, not in metaphor, not in code. He literally wrote, "We plan to throw it," and he wasn't bluffing. The NCAA found attempts to manipulate 7 different games. 7 games where fans paid money to watch competition that had already been corrupted. 7 games where coaches strategized without knowing the losses were scripted. 7 games where teammates gave everything they had, unaware that the outcome had already been sold for cash. But even those revelations didn't compare to the Mississippi Valley State investigation, which brought the darkest details of the entire scandal into the open. There, investigators discovered game fixing dating back months. A player named Donovan Sanders had been overheard on the phone discussing the plan to throw a game. The person on the other end needed reassurance that multiple players were participating, so Sanders asked a teammate to join the call. The teammate refused. After the game, Sanders instructed him to delete their messages. By the NCAA's findings, players were being paid to lose. Not figuratively, literally. The January 6th matchup against Alabama A&M was one of the confirmed fixed games. Not speculated, not assumed, confirmed. And while fans sat in the stands wondering why the team looked flat, why decisions seemed off, and why effort appeared inconsistent, the truth was much more disturbing. The players had already decided the conclusion before the first whistle. Investigators expected pushback, but what happened next made the NCAA look even worse in the public eye. The same governing body that had just banned players for gambling quietly implemented a new rule. College athletes were now allowed to legally bet on professional sports. This meant athletes weren't banned from gambling. They were banned from gambling on the wrong thing. The contradiction was stunning. On one hand, the NCAA punished players for betting on college games because of the obvious conflict of interest. On the other hand, they encouraged athletes to place bets on NBA, NFL, MLB, and WNBA games, complete with tutorials, partnerships, sponsorship integrations, and betting ads everywhere. The same athletes punished for using betting apps were now being taught how to navigate them responsibly. The same NCAA that insisted on preserving the integrity of college sports had no issue pushing athletes toward professional gambling markets. It created an environment where betting was normalized, encouraged, and monetized, but punished when it crossed a vague line. And nowhere was that contradiction more visible than in sports media. Television networks covered these scandals with stern expressions of moral outrage, while broadcasting from studios sponsored by DraftKings, FanDuel, and ESPN Bet. Analysts delivered monologues about integrity, while the bottom of the screen flashed BET Live Now. The system profited from every angle except the players. Everyone else could benefit: broadcasters, networks, leagues, platforms, casinos. But if a player crossed a line, suddenly the moral code became rigid. But the biggest problem, the one few people were willing to confront publicly, was that these weren't isolated cases. The pace of new scandals wasn't slowing down. It was accelerating. In baseball, pitchers Emmanuel Clase and Luis Ortiz were indicted for manipulating the speed and accuracy of their throws. Their goal wasn't to win or lose. It was to influence prop bets. Slight changes in velocity could make or break payouts. In the NBA, investigations into Michael Porter Jr. and Jonte Porter revealed just how simple it was for a player to rig stats without raising immediate suspicion. Take fewer shots, commit strategic fouls, get pulled early, fake an injury, skip rebounds. There were endless ways to manipulate the game without appearing obvious. And that was the most chilling part. The players who were caught were the ones who left a trail. The ones who texted too directly. The ones who bragged too loudly. The ones who thought no one would check. But for every player caught because of a text message, how many more covered their tracks? A missed layup looked harmless. A 4 for 15 performance looked like a slump. 2 turnovers in the final minutes looked like nerves. But if money was involved, if someone was betting, if someone had something to gain, those moments could have been deliberate. And that led investigators to a deeply uncomfortable question. What's happening in leagues that don't get the same level of scrutiny? What happens in sports where cameras aren't everywhere, analysts aren't watching every play, and millions of dollars in media rights aren't being spent? What happens in the WNBA? The league was rapidly growing, but still didn't receive the surveillance and attention that major men's leagues received. Smaller betting markets meant bets were easier to manipulate without raising alarms. Lower viewership meant strained performances weren't dissected at the same intensity. Fewer journalists meant fewer people tracking unusual patterns. And the gap between salary and temptation was undeniable. A single manipulated prop bet could be worth more than what some WNBA players made in a week or a month. No one was claiming it was happening. But the question remained unanswered. If someone wanted to fix games, wouldn't the easiest target be the league with the least oversight? Investigators noted that a 3 for 14 shooting night in the WNBA rarely triggered any suspicion. People would simply chalk it up to off nights, rough defense, travel fatigue, or luck. But every off night aligned perfectly with a potential prop bet opportunity. Every missed shot was someone's under. Every made shot was someone's over. The terrifying truth wasn't that corruption was confirmed. It was that almost nobody was checking. And after witnessing 3 college programs collapse under gambling schemes, after seeing NBA players face federal indictments, after watching MLB pitchers get charged with game manipulation, the natural question became this: how early are we into this story? Because when the NCAA reviewed all 3 scandals, they found something shocking. None of the players knew each other. None of the schools were connected. None of the schemes overlapped. These weren't networked operations. These were individual athletes at individual institutions, arriving at the same conclusion independently. The opening was there. The opportunity was there. The system was weak, and no one was watching closely enough. This wasn't one ring. This was a trend. And trends don't disappear on their own. If it happened at Arizona State, New Orleans, and Mississippi Valley State, why assume it hasn't already happened at other schools, or other conferences, or other leagues entirely? The more investigators looked, the more they realized they might be staring at the early stages of something much larger, the beginning of a gambling era that would force sports organizations to rethink everything. If billions of dollars were moving through sports books every night, who had the most control over outcomes? The players, the ones on the court, the ones in the midst of the action, the ones who could shape the result with a single choice. A missed shot, a careless turnover, a substitution request, a foul, a slow defensive rotation, a deliberate mistake disguised as a natural one. If even a handful of athletes decided to exploit that power, the integrity of entire leagues could be compromised without anyone noticing until it was too late. Fans watched games assuming they were real, honest, competitive. But how many moments across how many teams, how many leagues, how many seasons were influenced by something else? That was a question investigators couldn't shake. And now that the cracks were visible, now that the scandals were public, now that players have been banned and charged and exposed, the biggest question lingered like smoke in the air. If this is what's been discovered, what hasn't been? Because every scandal starts with someone slipping up, someone talking too loudly, someone texting the wrong person, someone assuming no one would ever look. And as history has shown across every sport, where there is money, where there's opportunity, where oversight is inconsistent, corruption doesn't just occasionally appear. It grows. And right now it's growing fast. So the question becomes, is this wave of scandals just the beginning? Or is gambling already infiltrated a major league that hasn't been exposed yet? Has a team, a player, or an entire locker room already manipulated outcomes without the slightest suspicion? If the NCAA's own investigation shows multiple players across multiple states discover the same loophole independently, why believe it stops at college basketball? Why believe it stops at men's sports? Why believe it stops anywhere? Viewers are left to wonder, how many games were real? How many performances were honest? And how many moments, celebrated, analyzed, and argued about, were quietly influenced by something happening far from the public eye? The truth is simple. No one knows. Not yet. But now that the first cracks have appeared, the questions won't go away. And fans, for the first time, are being forced to confront something uncomfortable. The integrity of sports is not guaranteed. It has to be protected. And right now, that protection is failing faster than anyone realized. So now the question is left for the viewer. Is this all coincidence? Or has another league already crossed the line without being caught? Leave your thoughts below, because this conversation is far from over.